help to give you guidance because it's so easy to get enamored with your entrepreneurial journey and everything is fresh and new and exciting. And, we're kind of adrenaline addicts when we're entrepreneurs, so we can get really high off the adrenaline and not really see the situation for what it is. So even though you think you're really smart and you think you know what you're getting yourself into, there's so much that happens behind the scenes to make a company successful and have longevity that it is worth investing in getting a coach to help you to pivot to success and build things out properly.
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of The Inventive Journey. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that's grown several startups into 7- and 8-figure businesses, as well as the founder and CEO of Miller IP Law, where we help startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. You ever need help with yours? Just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat. We're always here to help. Now, today we've got another great guest on the podcast, Angela Malrooney. And Angela started out liking teeth when she was 2 years old, and took that interest and followed it through high school and studied dentistry. And then after that, thought about going to graduate school, but had an opportunity to take over another person's practice or to help run it. After that, got injured and could have continued in the practice, but decided to go a different way. Sold the practice. Built a dancing practice and went that direction for a period of time. Opened up a business helping other dentists to build their practice. COVID hit, had to pivot, then grew the business, and then moved to Nicaragua, sold off everything except for helping others build their practice. So with that much as an introduction, welcome on the podcast, Angela.
Thanks, Devin. Nice to be here.
Hey, excited to have you on. So I just did a very condensed 30-second version to a much longer journey. But why don't we rewind a bit and unpack that? So tell us a little bit about how your journey got started liking teeth at a young age.
Yeah, for some reason, at 2 years old, I started wanting to poke my fingers in everyone's mouth and take a look at what was in there. My parents were like, I hadn't been to the dentist. I hadn't seen a TV show with dentists, so they have no idea where it came from. But that kind of set my path to finishing dental school at 24 and feeling like every day that I got to go to a dental clinic was the day I got to play instead of a day of work. So it was really a dream come true.
Well, that's awesome. So you got a dream come true. So you had that interest at a young age, and I think you went off to college to study dentistry or dentistry related things. You'll have to remind me or fill that in a little bit.
Yeah, so I went to the College of Dentistry. So I became a DMD, which is a Doctor of Medical Dentistry. And when I graduated, I was really keen to do the work that I did, but I was also really, really shy. So I decided to work with the people who were least likely for me to have a spontaneous conversation with, which was kids, because I could just tell them stories about the different colored sugar bugs I was taking out from their teeth, and they had a really good time. And then I would send them off to their parents and move on to the next one. So it made it easier for me to get over the social part of it while I could do the technical part of it, which I excelled at.
Makes perfect sense. So now you did that, and I think you'd thought about going to graduate school, but you took over someone else's practice, or kind of help us fill in the dots. So you went to college, got some of that, got the degree, and then where did the journey take you from there?
So about 4 years into being in practice, I realized, working with kids, it's kind of the same thing day in and day out. And I realized, if I'm going to continue to evolve myself, I needed to either go to grad school or do something different. So it was interesting, when you make that decision that something has to change, often something comes along that will change your life. And I ran into an old practice owner that I had worked for, and he was subbing in at a different practice for a 78-year-old dentist who was in the hospital dying of cancer. And he said, I don't really like doing dentistry. Why don't you just take a couple of days off my hands? So I said, sure, why not? 24 hours later, he called me and said, why don't you just take the whole thing off my hands? Because I really don't want to do dentistry anymore. So I ended up really having no idea what I was walking into. He sent me the address for the practice, and I hadn't really pictured where it was, but it was in the worst part of town. And so 24 hours later, I drove to the practice, and I'm sitting in the parking lot going, there's nobody here. It's dark. If I disappear, no one's going to know what happened to me. So I was a little freaked out, and he finally drove up beside me, and we went up to the practice. And when I opened the door, what greeted my eyes was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. The carpet was black because it had never been cleaned in probably about a decade, and it was filled with dirt and cigarette smoke. Everything was broken down in the practice. The patients had to hold the x-ray head because otherwise it would float away from them. So it was unlike anything I had experienced before.
So now so unlike any experience, now did you take over the practice, decide to buy it, run away screaming, or kind of where did it go from there?
So I decided to, well, it wasn't really a decision. It was just suddenly I walked into that practice and yeah, everything was broken down, but the view from the practice was amazing. And the more I worked in that practice, I realized there is something really special about this place. And it had so much potential, it could be definitely turned around. So I decided to go and visit the old dentist in the hospital and asked him what he thought about me buying the practice. Now, he had said to his team members, there was no way he was ever going to sell his practice to a woman. So me walking in there at 28 years old, and I looked like a little kid, it was a shock to him, but he had heard really good things about how I was treating his patients. So he decided that, it was time to pass on the reins, and he decided to sell it to me.
No, you decide, okay, worth the, or, even though it maybe was initially a little bit worrisome, but a good view, worked out, and everything is or what made sense to purchase a practice. So you purchase a practice, and then how did it go from there? Where'd you take it from there? Did you turn it around and make it a huge success, or did it flounder and you didn't go anywhere, and it was a good idea but a bad implementation, or somewhere in between? Or kind of give us an idea as to where it went.
Yeah, so for the first year, it was really that entrepreneurial rush. I hadn't fully been an entrepreneur before, so everything was like shiny and new and had these lovely rose-colored glasses on and so much energy. So I was able to increase the production of the practice by 73% and was able to start getting the patients turned around. So a lot of the patients, because the old dentist couldn't see properly, they had a lot of decay. If I showed them an x-ray, they could see the big black spot underneath the new filling that they had received from the old dentist. So there was a lot of repair that had to be done. And I started to realize, I'm out of my depth here because I primarily work with children, and children are kind of the same thing day in and day out. These broken down mouths I needed more information than I had and more skill that I had. So I decided to go off and do what is called the COIS program. So it's like a grad program for practicing dentists, and went and learned full mouth rehabilitation. I got my IV sedation certification so I could knock people out and do the dentistry on them when they were too scared to sit in the chair. I got my implants, I got my sleep apnea. So I really started to pull in a skill set that could serve this population, because I needed it to be able to not repeat history for them with what they had been through with the previous dentist.
So now so it sounds like you'd made you figured things out, turned it around, or had a lot of opportunity, and now as you're going through that, I think at some point you mentioned that you had an injury, or kind of set your path on a different direction. So kind of where bring us up to how did that occur? What was going on? How long you been doing the practice, and how did that impact it?
So by the time I got everything in place, I had the perfect skill set. I had an amazing team. I had amazing patients that were totally on board with what needed to be done. I ended up starting to have pain in my drilling hand. And it was the kind of pain that would make you stop and throw up. So I was going to the physiotherapist 2 floors down, and he was sticking needles in my arm, trying to get the muscles to relax. And then finally it came to my final day of practice, which was on a patient that I had IV'd. We were doing full mouth surgery, so I had flapped open, there was bone exposed, and it was time to suture her back together. And I went to pick up my hemostat to do the sutures, and my hand wouldn't listen to me. So I stared at it and tried to convince it to do what I wanted it to do, and it was not going to comply. So I motioned to my assistant to come out of the room with me and said, the problem I've been having, it's my hand's not working at all right now. So you are going to have to be my right hand. I'm going to use my left hand, and we're going to get this figured out and get her put back together and safe. And so we went in very ominously and quietly, and we just talked it through. We got the patient put back together and safe. Her case turned out beautiful. And that, unfortunately, was the last day I got to drill.
So now, you do that, and so it sounds like wasn't in the plan, or wasn't there where you wanted to head, but nonetheless you deal with what you have to deal with in order to first of all get the patient taken care of, but also to be able to get that get that done. But it sounds like it impacted your career path, or at least have potential. And I know when we talked a little bit before the podcast, said, hey, I might have been able to continue on or adjust or adapt or that, but at that point I was, considering going a different path. So maybe give us some ideas to kind of, once you had that occur, how did things go, or where did you go from there?
Yeah, so there was no option once that happened to keep drilling because I had no control over my hand. I couldn't even write with a pen, let alone control a 400,000 RPM drill in a human's face. So unfortunately, it took 6 months for them to figure out what was going on. I was in Canada. Unfortunately, our healthcare system, if something is really wonky and they need different people to look at it, the different people looking at it don't actually talk together and figure out the puzzle together. So for 6 months, I felt like I was an insane person, not knowing why this was happening, what I was going to do, whether I was going to be able to return to work, whether I was not going to be able to return to work. And everyone was trying to be hopeful. They're like, you know what, you love dentistry. This is your path. You're meant to go back. And I'm like, I'm not sure that you're actually correct anymore. So by the time 6 months was up, I was a week away from bankruptcy. I had already talked to the bank, was ready to hand my keys over. And I decided to throw a Hail Mary and got down to a Mayo Clinic in Scottsdale. And within a couple of days, they had figured out what was wrong with me and told me, you need to figure out what you're going to do with the rest of your life because you're not going to be a dentist anymore. And that should have been a devastating moment. But to be honest, it was the first time I had felt hope since it happened, because at least I knew, I'm not going to be able to drill anymore. So now I can actually make some decisions instead of hinging on two separate paths and not knowing which one I was going to be able to take. So I listened to what everyone else was telling me, which was, you built this amazing brand. You should keep your practice, just get some associates in there. And it seemed like they were smarter than me. And I was in a panic. So I was like, okay, I'm going to listen to these people who know more than me and do what they said. The only problem was with the skill set that I had acquired, I couldn't get one dentist to replace all my skills that the patients were expecting. So I ended up having to bring in 4 different associates at different times and schedules to try and cover off what the patients needed. So it was a bit of a nightmare. Eventually I was just like, you know what, I'm just going to simplify this down to what it originally was, which is a very simple practice. And then when 2015 hit, I was still in Calgary, and that was when the oil crisis hit. So I decided it was time to peace out and figure out what I was going to do with the rest of my life, because I was not going to go through another economic crisis like I had when I first bought the practice during the global financial crisis. And I didn't want to do it with associates in place. So I fire sold the practice for half of its value and started to move on with my life.
So now you sold the practice, and that's understandable why you made that or went that direction. But on the other hand, this is what you've been focusing on. You've done a lot of your education, a lot of your career, and now you're having to take a step back and basically decide, hey, where am I going to go now? And so how did you kind of go about figuring out that next step as to where you'd be going about now, or what that would look like and what you would do?
So staying anywhere near dentistry was not something I wanted at that point, because anyone in my circle of dentists knew what had happened. And if I talked to them, they just felt sorry for me and I would cry. And so I decided I was going to take a year away from dentistry, not talk to people from it, and just let myself heal from what had happened. And I decided to return back to professional dancing, which I had turned pro when I became a doctor. So I decided, yeah, that'll be a good way to escape, build a new company, build a brand around one of my skills. And so I built Unleashed Dance Company to the second largest adult-based Latin company in the first 6 months, and started to just, let the pieces of what had happened start to come together, and I could start to see how the puzzle, why things had happened and what I could do with it. And what I realized was, I'd been through some really weird situations with my practice. Like the owner died halfway through our deal, and the son tried to sell it out from underneath me. And then the employees decided to try and sue me. And then, worst case scenario was losing my ability to practice. So I realized, I built this career, I built this really cool niche practice, and I had some skills that I could pass on to other people to hopefully help them to be able to find their path faster. So I decided to build Unleashing Dentistry's Potential, which was a business coaching company for dentists, and see what I could do to help other dentists to do what they needed.
Yeah, and diving in, or just one question, because or maybe rewinding just a little bit, when you went into the dancing, or the dance company for a period of time, was that just out of the blue, or did you have experience, or were you a dancer, or did you work for a dance company before, or kind of what took you in that direction before jumping over to help, or to giving mentorship for people to run dentist practices? How did you get into dancing?
Right. So as I said, when I graduated dental school, that was the day I turned professional as a dancer. So I'd been doing that alongside dentistry the whole time, but the dental industry didn't really know that. So for some people, they thought I had run away to join the circus, which I actually had while I was still a dentist. But it was a shocker to them. My patients weren't surprised at all because they used to come to my dance competitions and cheer me on. So they saw that as a natural path and a natural break from my career as well. So it was easy for me to go into that and take a break that way.
Okay, makes sense. So now you're doing that, doing the dancing for a period of time, and I know you touched on it, but maybe just to unpack it a bit. So what made you decide to kind of go back toward, was it just purely just, hey, we're hitting a down economy and this may not be the best, path forward as far as keeping or continuing or my career and building it as far as dance, or kind of what was that shift back to dentistry after you made that departure?
So there wasn't a shift back, it was an add-on. So the dance company, I ended up running it for 5 years. But the coming back to dentistry was just realizing, like, I felt like I should use what I had built and should use the experience that I'd been through to help other people. So that's why I went that path. And what I did to actually build it was I took to LinkedIn and started talking about what I knew about dentistry and niching and passion. And in a year, I went from 200 to 12,000 dental industry followers. And then suddenly people were like, how did you do that? Because you came out of nowhere. You were a dentist and you were known as a dentist, but moving into the dental coaching, you came from ground zero. So I started experimenting with some other people's profiles, seeing what I could do for them and see if I was unicorn or if what I had done was actually replicable. And it turned out it was. So for about a year on the down low, I helped people with their social media accounts. And then January 17th, 2020, I launched Unleashing Influence as an official company. And then 2 months later, you know what happened. The pandemic hit and shut the world down.
So it sounds like it was, started out as a good thing, or helping people out, if nothing else, kind of side hustle, be able to provide additional information, share experience and help those out. And then, as you said, now were you still at that point when the pandemic hit? Were you still doing the dance company and the dentistry, mentorship program or whatever you want to call it, side by side, or did you jumped over full time, or kind of as the pandemic hit, where were you at?
So when the pandemic hit, I was running 3 full out companies. So I had Unleashed Dance Company, Unleashing Dentistry's Potential, and Unleashing Influence had just launched. So it was, I was working 100 hours a week. Pandemic hit, and my team, I had 2.5 full-time team members in the Unleashing Influence company at that point, and they're like, you know what, if you have to lay us off, everyone else is getting laid off. It's not a big deal. There's government funding and all this. And I said, no, buckle down. We're going to take this thing to the moon. So the dental company got shut down because dentists were shut down for about 3 months. When the pandemic hit, the dance company got shut down because we weren't allowed to gather in Canada. And then the social media agency just took off. By 10 months into it, we had 14 full-time team members. And it was just, when I told them to buckle down, I didn't realize how hard they had to buckle down, but we definitely took advantage of what the situation was, because people were coming to me since they couldn't speak on the stage anymore. They couldn't meet in person. So developing out their personal brand and driving business had to change. Like, they had to pivot on a dime to be able to do what they needed to do online.
Now, what was that? And you touched on, but what was that pivot, or kind of how did you adjust or have to adjust for when the pandemic hit and people aren't able to go outside as much and aren't as active, or otherwise maybe you're pushing off going to the dentist or all of those things? What was that pivot, or how did you adjust? Because it sounds like you kind of focus on the social media aspect, but give us an idea as to how you pivoted, or what that looked like.
Well, in the first 60 days of the pandemic, with the shutdown. So from March 17th until May 17th, I actually did 60 broadcasts in those 60 days. So 60 different education sessions for dentists, just trying to help them, because I'd been through trauma with my practice. I'd been through worst case scenario, and this was like, everyone was in worst case scenario. No one was in isolation. So I wanted to get them the information that they needed to actually be able to help themselves. The only thing was, they were in complete panic and they were completely shut down. So they're like, I'm not going to spend money on coaching because, you know what, we don't know how long this thing is going to go. So they were just like pulling everything in. They were laying off employees because they were just buckling down for the worst. So that company stalled for those first 90 days. The dance company, I don't even remember when we started to be able to have classes in person again. It was a long time. And when the day it was announced that, public classes and stuff were shut down, I remember thinking, oh, thank God, I don't have to teach rehearsal anymore. And I was like, ooh, that is not what I was expecting to come out of my face when I would think about my dance company. So to me, that was a sign that something had to change. So 3 months into the pandemic, I actually sold that company.
So now you sold the company, said, okay, have the self-realization, didn't think it would go this direction, but dance company is no longer of interest, I don't know, no longer of interest, but no longer the passion that it once was. And so you kind of focus at full time. So now pandemic hits, that's a couple of years ago, kind of catch us up. Where have things gone since then? How's it gone? Putting that pivot or doing that pivot, putting the full-time focus on it and going that direction, is it taken off and been a rocket ship to the moon? Is it still up and down and still figuring things out, or pivoting or adjusting, or give us an idea as to where things are or how things have gone?
So a year after the pandemic started, I decided to move to Nicaragua. And my plan with that was, I needed a reset because I was a workaholic. I was stuck inside with the pandemic. We weren't allowed to socialize at that point. And I felt like I was stuck in a snowbank. So I'm like, I might as well be stuck somewhere beautiful. So I decided to buy a flight down to Nicaragua. And 5 days after I arrived, I got stuck because Canada canceled all the tropical flights. So I was like, okay, well, there's definitely worse places to be stuck for the next 90 days. So I made the most of it. And, by the end of the 90 days, when we were allowed to fly back, I realized I was back to my old ways. I was working 100 hours a week. I had this giant team I was losing sleep over. I had these 2 companies that were pulling me in completely different directions. They were both successful, but they were just taking too much out of me. So I decided it was time to burn things down. So I talked to one of the people in my social media agency and said, hey, I want to keep the brand, so I want to keep Unleashing Influence, but I don't want to have the agency part anymore. So I sold her the agency part. And then with the Unleashing Dentistry's Potential, the consultant that was working for me, I asked her if I could sell her the company as well. So by 9 months into being in Nicaragua, I had divested my companies and allowed myself to just really niche into what I do best, which is really helping people to burn away the things that are keeping them from the life that they want. So being able to do the work that they want on their own time, making more money, working from anywhere in the world.
So makes perfect sense. Now, one question: what was the pull or the draw to Nicaragua? I mean, certainly you can get burned out, work a lot of hours, needing a break, needing to take a different direction. There's a lot of places you can go. And was it just throwing a dart at the map and wherever it landed, that's where you're going, or was it, or kind of how'd you figure out where you were going to go to take that break?
Well, originally it started with darts, and every time I threw darts, like at South Africa or Australia or New Zealand, then Canada would have a spike in their COVID numbers and the borders would get shut to Canadians. So I finally was like, well, I'm still leaving. I'm still going to do this. And so Nicaragua became the path of least resistance. And it was actually like, I really didn't know what I was getting myself into, but it's a really rugged paradise that is quite untouched. So it was an amazing choice.
That's awesome. Well, it sounds like it was a good decision. Gave you a good or pause or break from the where you were at, and allowed you to build things to where they're at today. So now kept on to the parts that you thought you were the best at or the most passionate about. And so now where's that at today? Is it continuing to move forward, continuing to help people, taking a pause, went a different direction, pivoted? Where'd it go?
So now it's just driving that endeavor to the moon. So I like to drive things to the moon. And I've decided I'm not allowed to start any more companies for the next 5 years. So I'm just going to hunker down with Unleashing Influence. And I've changed my way of delivering my information. So before I used to work one-on-one with people, and now all I do is run masterminds. So I run group cohorts where they get to pivot their business, build out their whole business in 90 days, get their brand launched, get their offer launched so that they can take the experience and expertise that they have and be able to teach people what they know. So it's I get to work with some really high-level smarty pants and make a difference in their life and help them to have that financial freedom as well as the geographic freedom that they want.
Well, sounds like it's been a great opportunity, and definitely has worked out. So, well, awesome. Well, now as we kind of we're reaching the present day of your journey, always a great time to transition to the 2 questions that I always ask. So the first question I ask is, along your journey, what was the worst business decision you ever made? What'd you learn from it?
The worst business decision I have ever made is listening to other people. So when that first emerged was after I got injured, and everyone's telling me, you built this amazing thing, you should keep it, you should. So people were shitting all over me. And I was so afraid that I was like, well, they know more than me because they've been in the industry, they've helped other people through this. But inside, it was every time that I walked into my practice, it was like someone scraped the scab off my heart and I started bleeding again. It was such a wound for me to lose that dream that I had since I was 2. So it was really it was devastating going into the practice, but I was like, well, they said I should, so I probably should. And so that was one of the biggest lessons, when 2015 hit and the oil crisis hit, everyone was like, you should keep it. And I'm like, no, I'm done. I'm done. I'm happy to hand this off to someone else. I've done my best with it. I've achieved what I wanted. It's time to move on. So people thought I was insane, but it was the best move I could have made.
Okay, well, sounds like it was a good move overall and a good mistake to learn from. So second question now that I ask is, if you're talking to somebody that's just getting into a startup or a small business, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give them?
Find help to give you guidance, because it's so easy to get enamored with your entrepreneurial journey and everything is fresh and new and exciting. And, we're kind of adrenaline addicts when we're entrepreneurs, so we can get really high off the adrenaline and not really see the situation for what it is. So even though you think you're really smart and you think you know what you're getting yourself into, there's so much that happens behind the scenes to make a company successful and have longevity, that it is worth investing in getting a coach to help you to pivot to success and build things out properly.
Awesome. Well, definitely a great piece of advice and a great takeaway. So awesome. Well, with that, as we're wrapping up the episode, and if people want to reach out to you, they want to be a customer, they want to be a client, they want to be an employee, they want to be an investor, they want to be your next best friend, any or all of the above, what's the best way to reach out to you, contact you, find out more?
LinkedIn is the best place to find me. So you can find me under Dr. Angela Malrooney. And if you're wanting an exposure to some of the things that I do offer challenges every month, which you're going to get fire hosed with information on how to build your personal brand, how to pivot, how to use LinkedIn. So if you're wanting to kind of dip your toes into it, that would be the best path to start with.
Awesome. Well, I definitely encourage people to check it out, reach out, and if nothing else, make a new best friend. So thank you again for coming on the podcast. It's been fun. It's been a pleasure. Now, for all of you, the listeners that are out there, you have your own journey to share and you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, we'd love to have you. So just go to inventiveguest.com, apply to be on the show. A couple more things as listeners. Make sure to click share, subscribe, and leave us a review, because it really helps us to share all these journeys with even more startups and small businesses to help them along their journey to success. And last but not least, if you ever need help with your patents or trademarks or anything else with your startup or your small business, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat. We're always here to help. Well, thank you again, Angela, for coming on the podcast, and wish the next leg of your journey even better than the last.
Thanks, Devin.